Well, today, I have no idea if this is going to be too loud or not, so please just let me know if I'm gonna actually turn this down a little bit more. I hope that's okay. But yeah, obviously you know me. Whenever I do ASMR, I like to have that background music, and I don't actually know if it's too loud or not. So please just let me know if it is. But anyway, hello. I hope you all are well today. I apologize, I have not really been doing so hot for the past week, which is the primary reason I was not streaming. But right now, I am okay enough to really get back into it, at least a little bit. So we're going to continue some ASMR bedtime story reading. I have RWBY Roman Holiday right here. And yeah, I'm ready to get back into this. We're about halfway through the book. We're on chapter 14. We're on chapter 14 when there's there's 26 chapters, and we're currently on chapter 14, so we're actually halfway through the book. So I hope you guys are ready. I tend to usually do about 4 to 5 chapters per stream, and I'm going to try to do a little bit more to make up for not being really around. But yeah, why don't we get into this, shall we? Chapter 14. Tea for Two. From the way Neapolitan delicately sipped her tea and ate her finger sandwiches, Roman could tell she had been taught good manners, or more likely had them inflicted on her. The Laughing Dog was his favorite tea room in Vale. It was modeled after Mistrali tea rooms, right down to the paper folding screens around the booth to provide some measure of privacy. "You want to know how I found you?" Roman said. Excuse me. Neapolitan sat back and swept a hand toward him, inviting him to go ahead. "It was that pin you're wearing." Roman stuffed a whole finger sandwich into his mouth. None of that refined nibbling for him. If you didn't know where or when your next meal was coming, you didn't waste time eating. Of course, he normally wouldn't be eating in a tea shop, but that was exactly why he was here, because no one would think to look for Roman Torchwick in a tea shop either. It certainly wasn't because he wanted to impress her or anything. "Get it together, Roman," he thought. He wasn't acting like himself. It felt important somehow, this meeting. He knew that she could see right through him, so he didn't feel like he needed to pretend with her. And she wouldn't respect him if he tried. She also didn't seem afraid of him, or to want anything from him. That was kind of refreshing, really. Neapolitan looked down on the pin on her lapel. She traced one of the swirls with a distant look in her eyes. "I looked it up. I wasn't expecting to get quite so many hits. The triple spiral, kind of a symbol for ladies in high society. A badge or whatever." Roman flipped through her scroll and showed her photos from the Vale Society pages and profiles of women in business. Many of them wore a matching pin, but in gold. "And then there's your uniform, though you've updated it some. It wasn't hard to connect you with Lady Browning's Preparatory Academy for Girls." Roman slurped his tea. Neapolitan scrunched up her face. "So, that's lesson number 1, he went on. Learn to disguise yourself better if you're going to commit a crime." She gave her a lopsided grin. A pink shimmer traveled down her from her head, transforming her into a perfect copy of Roman, the way he'd been dressed last night, complete with the hat he'd lost. His mouth fell open, and Neapolitan's mouth mirrored the action, showing him just how astonished he was. He laughed. Well, you passed the first lesson already. You're a quick study. Roman had always looked down on semblances, and not because he didn't have one, as far as he knew. Most of the ones he'd encountered were only good in combat, while Roman could hold his own in a fight, usually. He would much rather rely on his intellect, charm, and roguish good looks to get what he wanted. He didn't mind cheating, as long as he did it fair and square. But an ability like Neapolitan's, that opened up a whole world of possibilities. She had already demonstrated how handy it was in last night's escape, and it had some good strategic value as well. The heists he could pull off with a power like that, the information he could control, the cons he could come up with. I'm impressed, he said. Neapolitan blushed, still wearing his face. That was sure unnerving. And I'm honored. I rather expect you don't go showing off to just anyone. She shook her head. She pointed at Roman, then held up one finger. She counted 2, 3, 4. Only a few people know about it. That's good. Just be careful who you trust. People might try to use you. She raised an eyebrow. So, he assumed her parents, who was the fourth person who knew about her semblance. Sister, best friend, significant other. Neapolitan seemed to be a loner like Roman. He recognized a kindred spirit in her. So maybe it was the school's headmistress, Lady Beatrix Browning. Wyatt Neapolitan decided to risk exposing her semblance and herself by using it to save a complete stranger last night. Neapolitan's form shimmered, and she was now Roman dressed as he was now with his black hoodie. She covered her head with her hood and looked shiftily back and forth. That's right, I'm laying low too. I've discovered that the downside to being so recognizable is you're easier to find when people come looking for you. She changed into Melanie Malachite, nailing the girl's disaffected expression perfectly. Melanie was dressed in a school uniform similar to Neapolitan's. She goes to your school, so that's why you happened to be there when things went down. Neapolitan nodded. She typed, How do you know the Malachites? Roman sighed. That is a long story. Neapolitan lifted the teapot and refilled his cup, and then her own. All right, then. So he told her about his mother abandoning him as a child in Windpath, about living on the streets, stealing to survive, and joining Little Miss Malachite's organization as a step towards bigger and better things. By the time he was finished, their second pot of tea was empty, and Neapolitan had finally had her fill of sandwiches and cakes. I've never told anyone all that before, Roman said. Then again, he hadn't known anyone who would have cared. But I'm nothing special. Lots of people in Mistral have a story like that. Or worse. You don't fall into a life of crime when you grow up having everything. Neapolitan cupped her chin with her hand and looked pensive. Present company expected, but you aren't a hardened criminal yet, and I wouldn't recommend it. She shook her head and frowned. I mean, sure, you get to do whatever you want. No one tells you what to do. He yawned. You can stay up as late as you like. He winked. As long as you don't get caught. Or mixed up with someone like Little Miss. He gestured to her shopping bags. So what's all that stuff anyway? She showed him some of the stuff and some of the things she'd picked up. Hair dye? You're gonna do the other half too? She smiled and ran her hand down the pink side of her hair. It turned its natural dark brown. You tried it out and decided to make it permanent. She nodded. It suits you. I like your eyes too. She smiled and continued showing off the rest of her haul. Looks like you're planning something big. What are you messing around with lockpicks for? She hesitated, then reached for her scroll. She typed a response quickly. Expanding my horizons. He grinned. Well, I can certainly help with that. I'd be happy to show you the ropes. Neapolitan clapped. He leaned in a bit and lowered his voice. But listen, how would you like to do some real spy stuff? She leaned forward eagerly. I've heard rumors that Little Miss is challenging the Vale crime bosses, expanding her horizons, if you know what I mean. If her daughters are at your school, that can't be a coincidence. I'm thinking they're involved somehow. Would you mind snooping around the academy a little? She looked down at the table, biting her lip. He'd expected her to jump at the opportunity. There certainly seemed to be no love lost between her and Melanie and Militia. He was surprised when she shook her head. No. He leans back in his seat. You won't help me. Mind if I ask why? She typed the response more slowly and seemed reluctant to show him the screen. I can't risk getting kicked out. Roman laughed. You don't want to miss school. Okay. He held up a hand. Okay, it's better that way. You're right. You shouldn't hang around with me. You'll just get into trouble and regret it one day. Why ruin a good thing, right? Neapolitan looked upset. She put her hands together and bowed her head in apology. Don't worry, it's fine. Hey, I'm still grateful, and I still owe you for your help. So if you ever need me, just say the word. She nodded. Then her face brightened, and she picked up a bag. She handed it to Roman. I already have a lock-picking kit. He opened the bag. Inside was a new bowler hat. You stole this for me? You shouldn't have. He examined it. It's exactly like my old one. She shook her head. She pointed at a red feather sticking from the hatband. He laughed. Okay, you're right. This is better than my old one. No one had ever given him a gift before, either. What were you even supposed to say when someone did something nice for you? Well, thanks. He patted his belly. We should probably get out of here now. You head for the bathroom and sneak out the back, and I'll slip out the front when the waitress's back is turned. Neapolitan pursed her lips. She waved her hand in the negative. What do you mean, no? Neapolitan stood, gathered her bags, and tossed a wad of bills on the table. Then she walked out. Roman picked up the money. It felt real enough. He followed Neapolitan out, glancing behind him to see that the cash was still there. The waitress waved to him and wished him good night. Neapolitan yanked him out the door and closed it softly behind her. Was that real money? He asked. She shook her head. So it's going to disappear eventually. She nodded. As soon as she puts it in the register? Neapolitan put her finger on her nose. Wow, that's messed up. But I like the way you work. He didn't quite get how her semblance worked, but sure could come in handy. And I think we might actually work well together. So if you change your mind about that favor I asked you, look me up. See you around. Roman popped his new hat on and started to walk away. Neapolitan whistled. He turned. She spread her hands and shrugged. Don't want to make it too easy on you. He winked. I found you. Let's see if you can find me. He tipped his hat and walked away. Okay. Chapter 15. Fight and Flight. Neapolitan circled Amanda Rynn slowly, watching the way the huntress moved, looking for a weakness. The older woman had 3 advantages over her. She was much bigger and stronger. She had a fire sword, and Neo couldn't use her semblance at school, especially in front of her entire self-defense class. Neo hefted her wooden training sword. She didn't like the heavy weapon. It was throwing her off balance. She wanted something lighter to fight with, like Roman Torchwick's cane, a weapon that matched her personality. Any day now, Rynn said. Neo blew her bangs out of her eyes and rushed towards the instructor, swinging the sword. Rynn parried easily with her own sword and lunged for Neo. Neo hopped up lightly onto the broad blade. Rynn tried to shake her off. Neo vaulted away just as the huntress activated the flames, somersaulting over the huntress. She planned to land behind her and whack her with the sword, but Roman turned and kicked high while Neo was still in the air. The huntress's foot connected with Neo's stomach, knocking the wind out of her and knocking her clear across the room. Neo jumped up instantly, spinning the wooden sword like a baton, a fierce scowl on her face. Good try, new girl, Rynn said. You're fast and clever, both excellent qualities in a fight. Does anyone know what Trivia did wrong? Neo blinked at the use of her own name. Of course she hadn't told anyone to start calling her Neapolitan, but she already felt disconnected from her former life. She lowered the sword and walked back to the arena. She tried to punch above her weight, Melanie Malachite said. Not quite. A person Trivia's side could very easily get the best of me. Her size could actually be an asset, especially if it makes others underestimate her, Rin said. She zigged when she should have zagged, Laurel said. The class laughed, but not in this mean-spirited way. Nia was there for a reason, like all of them, and she deserved some respect for volunteering to go up first against the teacher. And they all knew that they would be next and might not fare any better. That's a bit closer, Rin said. She had a good strategy, but you need to have at least 3 plans for every movement in a fight. Do you attack? Do you defend? Do you dodge? And you need to keep your eyes on your opponent, read what they're going to do, and in that split second react appropriately. Naturally, if they're a good fighter, they're doing the same thing as you are. She sheathed her weapon. In some ways, it's more like a dance than a fight. And you need to pick up on the subtle cues your partner gives you by constantly studying their body language and not allowing yourself to be misdirected or distracted. Rin bowed to Neo, and Neo returned the gesture. I know this isn't a combat school, but by the time we're done here, you'll be as skilled as any huntress and remnant. Rin tapped the gold Triskelion pinned over her breast. I was just a student here, less like you, so I know it's possible. But what's the point? Another girl asked. I don't like fighting. Not fighting is a privilege. Entrusting your safety to people like me is a privilege. Rin looked at her sword. You may not feel like the Grimm are much of a threat here in the city, but you never know what they're capable of. I've seen some things in the field you would not believe. Grimm who can learn and adapt to fight humans and faunas better, as if they weren't tough enough. Not to mention other people, Melanie said. True. You also need to be prepared to defend yourself against others. Rin sheathed her weapon, and willing to do whatever it takes to get what you want. Neo's eyes rounded. She didn't think that sounded like something a huntress would say. Excuse me. You're surprised? In my time in the field, I've learned that the most important thing to do to keeping order is showing strength. Respect isn't enough to keep people safe. You need their admiration, and they need to be more afraid of the alternative than they are of you. Not everyone is able to master that, and few still are ready to accept it. Are you? Neo nodded. She saw Melanie and Militia look at her and put their heads together. After class, on the way to the lunchroom, the sister flanked her in the hall. Neo steeled herself for another fight. We were wrong about you, Neo. Maybe you do have what it takes to be here, Melanie said. You're sitting with us today, Militia said. Neo hesitated, then nodded, as though that sounded okay with her. The school had been a nightmare before, but now it was a dream come true. The problem was, it was someone else's dream. She never wanted to be accepted by the popular girls. She had only wanted to be accepted by someone. Now she was sitting at Melanie and Militia. Excuse me. Sorry. Now she was sitting at Melanie and Militia's table, and she should be happy that she wasn't alone and no one was making fun of her. What she really wanted to do was embarrass the twins in front of the whole school and take revenge on all the bullies who had been picking on Neo since she arrived. But she needed to pretend to want to be their friend to get information that would convince Roman she was on his side. And she needed to keep Roman on the hook so Lady Beat would continue to trust her and leave her free to do what she wanted. Double dealing was exhausting, but it gave her a thrill too. Trivia, what does your family do exactly? Militia asked. I know your daddy's rich or you wouldn't be here. You live in that big mansion on the hill, right? Melanie asked. Not anymore, Neo typed. She held up her scroll to show the words backwards so they could see it on the other side of the display. It was like she had her own subtitles, translating what she really was thinking into what they wanted to hear. Your dad's well connected, though. I guess. He works out business contracts for the city. We know how important the people behind the scenes are, That's why Little Miss always replaces them with her own people first thing. Neo feigned ignorance. Who? Little Miss is our mother. She runs things in Mistral, Melanie said. I'm sure she would like to meet your father, Militia said. Neo shook her head. Why not? Is he already working for someone else? It's not that. He wouldn't be interested. He's big on rules. Neo rolled her eyes. She gestured around her. Why else did they think she was here? Everyone has their price, even you, Melanie smiled, but in a mean way. Neo looked down. She was right, though, wasn't she? But the arrangement she had was pretty victimless. She was just sharing information, and since she was playing both Roman and Lady Beat, it would all even out in the end. The only thing that mattered was that Neo coming out ahead for the first time in her life. Hey, we're going clubbing tonight. You should come too, Vanille, Militia said. Neo's eyes went round. You're sneaking off campus? I wouldn't call it sneaking, since we pretty much... B gave us a special assignment, Melanie cut in quickly. It comes with some privileges. The confusion on Neo's face was real. The twins had gone after Roman the other night. She had thought they had just happened to run into him, but what if they'd known where to find him and Lady Beat had sent him after him? In that case, it was a good thing Neo didn't try to turn them in for leaving the school after all. It seemed that Lady Beat had given them the same deal Neo had gotten, so they were effectively competing against each other. That would be just like Lady Beat, to play them off one another and give them the same goal to improve her chances of success. If Melanie Militia brought in Roman, where would that leave Neo? No wonder they were suddenly welcoming her. She had to make sure that she got to Roman first, stayed close, and protected him from them if she had to. Militia flicked a chicken nugget at Scarface the next table over with a bored look on her face. Just yesterday, Neo probably would have been the unlucky target of her childish bullying. So it's settled. You're in. You can borrow one of my outfits, Melanie said. Neo shook her head. Oh? You have other plans? Neo shrugged. She put her hands together in front of her, palms up, and looked down at them. I don't get it, Militia said. Use your words, Melanie said exasperately. Neo raised an eyebrow and typed, catching up on reading tonight. Really? That's a snore fest. Neo shrugged. Another time. Thanks. She smiled. Whatever, Melanie said. Neo did have homework to catch up on, but she was fairly certain it would be anything but boring. In fact, she was really looking forward to it. Okay, Chapter 16, Partners in Crime. Someone knocked on Roman's door. He checked the security camera by his door, and his blood ran cold for a moment. Little Miss Malachite was standing on the other side. He grabbed his cane from the umbrella stand and prepared himself to face his old boss. You're in control here, Roman muttered to himself. She's on your turf this time. The more he looked at her image on the screen, the more she looked slightly off. She was shorter, for one thing, and her mole was under her left eye for another. Her face was 5 years younger than she appeared when they'd met. So unless she'd had a lot of work done lately, and had never been that caught up about her appearance, this was an imposter. Roman opened the door. Hello, Neapolitan, he said. Little Miss looked disappointed. He saw the familiar pink shimmering lights as Neapolitan dropped her disguise and trudged into the apartment, carrying a parasol over one shoulder and a sour expression. He closed the door behind her. She looked back at him, a question on her face. First, Little Miss Malachite wouldn't knock on the door. She would knock it down, he said. Neapolitan slapped her hand against her forehead. Second, she wouldn't be alone. She always had a bodyguard with her. I know because it was me for a while. I don't think she ever needs one, but it helps make people underestimate her. Neapolitan nodded. She remembered that part of his story. Third, Little Miss never leaves Mistral. which is what makes it so strange that she's making a move on Vale. Better to be a strong queen than a weak emperor, she used to say. But she only trusts she only trusts her people so far, even her own daughters. So she wouldn't leave things up to others unless she could somehow supervise operations closely. He paused. You also must have found an old photo of Little Miss. My advice, only try to impersonate people you've seen in real life. She sighed. But it was a good effort. Sure surprised me at first. That cheered her up enough to take an interest in his apartment. She started scrolling around with her hands clasped behind her, studying every object like it was a part of a museum exhibit. Mind if I ask you a question? He asked. She tossed a hand back behind her. Go ahead. How did you find me? Honestly, he hadn't expected to ever meet Neapolitan again after she turned down his request for her help, or he never would have issued a challenge he didn't think she could complete. For all his efforts to get his name out there in the criminal underworld, you couldn't just look Roman Torchwick up in the phone book. The only reason Heishong's men had been able to find him was because he had wanted them to. He supposed he had wanted Neapolitan to find him too, but he hadn't made it easy for her. Or had he? Neapolitan gave him a sly smile. He waited, wondering if she was going to reveal her secrets. Then she reached up to the side of her head and plucked a small feather out of midair. She blew it toward him and disintegrated into glowing pink particles before it reached his face. Roman squinted and took off his hat. A feather? The hat Neapolitan had given him at the tea shop. He had thought the feather was just for decoration, but he pulled it out and held it up to his eye. The feather shaft was made of a thin metal wire, and there was a tiny computer chip at its base. A transponder? He looked at Neapolitan in awe. She held up her scroll so he could see the map on the screen with a pulsing blue dot. She made a finger gun with her free hand and pointed it at him. He laughed. You got me. He used a Dotago magnet to stick the feather to the refrigerator in the kitchen. We'll just leave that right there. He put his hat back on. I'm impressed. You're very sneaky, Neapolitan. It's a good thing you're on my side. He crossed his arms. I assume that's why you're here. She hesitated, then nodded. So, how was school? He asked. Learn anything? He jerked backward as he swung her parasol at his face. He kept it pointed at him. He jerked backward as... her hand was steady. What's that supposed to be? He asked. She turned and pretended to fence with an invisible opponent with the parasol. Is that supposed to be a weapon? Should I be scared? She gestured to the cane leaning against the table. You know, a cudgel isn't a mere walking stick. It's a carefully crafted offensive instrument. She shook her parasol. Sure, I can help you modify that, you think? He said. You think what? Concealed guns are always popular? She shook her head and jabbed it with it again. A hidden blade. Classic. He picked up his cane. But you'll need to know how to use it, as we may as well start with the basics. Neapolitan showed that while she hadn't been formally trained, she had natural aptitude. She had some fencing lessons before, and she was light on her feet. Quick. She had excellent instincts, and she didn't hesitate to strike at vulnerable spots. Roman went easy on her, of course. She tried using her semblance to distract him, creating a duplicate that he attacked instead of her while she snuck upon him. He stopped the lesson. No tricks, he said. She gave him a look that suggested she thought he was crazy. I mean, of course, tricks, but you need to learn how to fight without them first. You won't always be able to rely on your semblance, or whatever you call it, to get you out of a rough situation, especially if you got yourself into it in the first place. She held up her scroll and typed. He read the word on the other side. Overactive imagination. He nodded. You have a powerful skill, but it's more useful if you use it strategically, sparingly. You want it to be a surprise, a backup plan, not your go-to. First, you learn to fight properly, the way I did, the way I'm going to teach you. He picked up his cane. Again, loser buys dinner. This time, Neapolitan avoided using her semblance in combat, which immediately placed her higher than any of his fighting partners. None of them had ever listened to him because they all thought they knew better than he did. Even so, she surprised him for the third time that night by literally getting the drop on him with a fancy move. After he lunged his weapon at her, she hopped up onto it and then leaped again over his head. Before he could spin and block her attack, she had whacked him in the back of the head with her parasol on the way down and followed up with a kick to his butt as she landed. He stumbled forward, but she reached out and caught the back of his jacket with the curved handle of the parasol so he didn't fall. He straightened and smoothed out his jacket. He turned to face her. She was grinning and spinning her open parasol behind her, though it was already in tatters from their fight. She had won that round fair and square, and taught him a thing or two in the process. All right then, where do you want to eat? The two of them fell into a strangely comfortable rhythm over the next couple of months. Every day, Nia learned new skills and fighting techniques at school, and at night she came to Roman's to practice them on him. Roman taught her everything he knew about picking locks, stealing cars, forgery, hold-ups, all the things he had picked up on the street and from working in Little Miss Malachite's gang. Finally, it was time to put everything she had learned to the test. Excuse me. One evening when they were training, a knock came at the door. "Neo, if you would." Neo looked at the door. She looked at Roman. She mimed knee-slapping, gut-busting laughter. "Ha ha," Roman walked past her toward the door. "I simply asked you to get the door because it's for you." She stopped laughing and pointed to herself with a skeptical expression. Roman opened the door and picked up the long package wrapped in brown paper that was propped next to it. He closed the door and presented it to her. "More specifically, this is for you," he said. Neo took the box delicately from him. She weighed it in her hands. She shook it. She pressed her ear against it. "Don't worry, it isn't flowers." She stuck her tongue out at him. "Go ahead, open it." He sat on a stool by the counter and watched as she untied the string and peeled off the brown paper. Inside was a pink cardboard box. She shot him another glance. He spun his feet around. "It's really not flowers." She lifted the lid off the box and rummaged in the pink and white tissue paper before she found what was inside. Her eyes went round like saucers, and she hopped up and down. Then she pulled out a parasol. She popped it open and admired the pink, white, and brown lace-like patterns embroidered into the light, durable fabric. She held it over one shoulder and twirled it, batting her eyelids at him. "It's exactly as you designed it," he said. "That canopy will resist bullets, energy blasts, even small dust explosion if you're having a really wild time." And she jumped backward and held it over her head, using the parasol to drift gracefully toward Roman. "Yep, you can do that too," he grinned. She closed the parasol and swung it around experimentally. If it was anything like his own weapon, it should be weighted perfectly. Neo pressed the button, and the sharp tip of the thin sword projected from the end of the parasol. She held the middle of the parasol and pulled out the curved black handle, drawing a rapier from the shaft. She slashed it back and forth in the air with a rapturous expression on her face. "I can tell you hate it," Roman said. Neo sheathed her weapon and leaned on it with one hand, and placing the other over her heart. "Don't get mushy on me," he said gruffly. "You needed a real weapon, now you have one. I'm really being selfish when you think about it, since I don't want you getting me killed. Do you have a name picked out?" She closed her left eye and pressed a finger to her lips. "Hush." She nodded. "Perfect. She'll definitely shut up some people with that in your hands." He hopped off the stool. "Now for the bad news. You can't steal a bespoke like that, so I had to pay for, like some kind of rube." He ordered it from his favorite weaponsmith back in Mistral, gunmetal. He didn't come cheap, especially when you were paying extra for confidentiality. Which means we're out of money. Neo skipped towards Roman's idea board with Hush. "That's right. You think you're ready to commit a real crime?" he asked. She shook her head. No? Roman put his hands behind his head. You've been asking to go out and steal something every day. She nudged Roman towards the closet and gestured for him to open it. Okay, he opened it. It was full of clothes. What's all this? He asked. These aren't mine, officer. I've never seen them before in my life. She pulled her hanger off the rack and held it out to him. It was a long white suit jacket with red lining and gold buttons. It was just his style and just his size. She held up another hanger with a black shirt and pants and a gray scarf. Where'd you get these? He asked. And how'd you sneak them in here? She ignored him and pulled out another suit, white, brown, and pink. Judging by how there was significantly less fabric and it came with a corset, that one was for her. You made me a new outfit? He asked. She nodded. Well, it would be rude not to at least try it on. She directed him to change in his bedroom while she changed in the bathroom. They met 10 minutes later in front of the mirror in the training gym. It looks good, Roman said. Neo pouted. Great, actually. Really nice work. We look like quite a team. She snapped her fingers, skipped away, and returned with his bowler hat. She reached into a pouch and drew out a red feather, which she stuck in the brim. Just a regular feather this time, yeah? He asked. She smiled innocently, then rose on her tiptoes and placed the hat on his head. He sighed. Your talents are being wasted with me. I might just regret leading you down the path of crime. Her look said, don't flatter yourself. Then she went back to his idea board, which contained sketches and scribblings of possible illegal activities, all designed to make him rich and powerful. So many choices, Roman said. Neo started tearing down cards, shaking her head, crumpling them up, and throwing them away. Hey! He snatched up his preliminary plans for a doom cannon. Not practical yet, but he had been just doodling drawings. He just didn't know how he'd ever have a large enough supply of dust to power a weapon of mass destruction like that. A guy needed to have dreams, though. He picked up another crumpled plan, then another, then another. He started to notice a trend. When she was tossing away all the jobs that needed only one person, which didn't leave any options since he didn't exactly work well with others. You know, I recently had an idea for a 2-person job, Roman said, but I just don't know if anyone's good at both following orders and improvising if something goes south. Neo waved her hand in the air. Are you sure you could accept it? Are you sure you can handle it? She paused and put her hands on her hips, and then leveled her gaze at him. She was smart enough to want to hear what he had in mind first. We're going to steal something that almost everyone in the city needs. Artificially create a shortage. Then, when people are desperate and vulnerable, we'll flood the market and charge exorbitant prices. Neil held up her scroll. Dust? Dust. He sighed. You weren't the first to suggest that. Maybe I should look into that, but let's stick a pin in it for now. I had something else in mind. He held his hands in the air, fingers spread. Coffee! Neo made a yuck face and stuck out her tongue. I know, but people just don't have the same attachment to tea. As soon as the people of Vale have to work and face a work meeting without their morning cup of coffee, we'll bring the city to its knees. Roman clenched a fist dramatically. Neo scratched her head. Roman lowered his fist. That's the beautiful part about this. He slumped down onto the couch. I have no idea, so we get to figure it out together. Neo nodded and blinked her eyes. She turned the idea board to face Roman, picked up the marker, and started drawing. When she stepped away, Roman saw a cute cartoon of Roman with an enormous head. A slightly big head Neo was perched on top of him, balancing on his bowler hat with a parasol raised high. Roman stroked his chin while he considered it. He nodded. What could possibly go wrong? Chapter 17. Brewing Trouble. Step 1. The boring part, not the boring part, reconnaissance. Neo had no idea that planning a heist took so much time and work. So much. She'd always been on the impulsive side, but Roman insisted that a successful job took careful research and extensive scheming. The only way you could trust that the other members of your team were on the same page was for there to be a page in the first place. Then they had to be able to read it, and then follow the plan to the letter. When he'd gone into a situation without knowing exactly what was going to happen, it either hadn't ended well or was a close call. He didn't like close calls. Roman clearly had some trust issues to work out, but Nia was going to prove to him that he could count on her. First things first, we need to know where the Vale Coffee warehouse is, Roman had said. The docks probably. That's where you come in. When Neo came in and was staking out a magic beans, the ubiquitous coffee shop and franchise in Vale. She already had a brilliant disguise, a preparatory school student who had a lot of homework to catch up on. She spent 3 days there at a tiny table in a hard seat, drinking lukewarm, tasteless tea before a delivery truck finally rolled up outside. She packed up her work and hurried to the bathroom, where she used her semblance to transform into a black-haired barista in a magic beans hat and apron. Then she waited near the storage area until the delivery guy appeared, just pushing a cart piled high with a jute bag stamped with the stylized logo of the Mistral Mountains Roastery. "Oh, hey, how's it going?" he said as he passed. Neo shrugged. "I know, right?" he said. She got a good look at him, and as soon as he entered the back room, she kicked the door closed and locked it. She brushed her hands together and went back to his truck. She climbed to the driver's seat and looked through all the stops on the dashboard navigation display until she found the starting point for his deliveries. She snapped photos of with her scroll and sent them to Roman. "Good work," he wrote. "Head on back, and bring me a coffee. Splash of cream, no sugar." When she got back to Roman's apartment, he had spread out maps of the area around the coffee warehouse and blueprints of the building itself, and was jotting down notes of the ID board. He reached for the paper magic beans cup she was carrying. She handed it over. He nearly fumbled it because it was lighter than he'd expected. He turned the cup upside down. "Forget something?" She pointed to the name written on the side of the cup. "Get your own coffee," he read. Ha ha. Step 2. Intrusion. Even after 2 weeks of preparation, memorizing maps of the warehouse district, studying aerial photographs, and planning their route, Roman still wasn't 100% sure he was on the right building. But it matched the coordinates that Neo had scored from the Freight's driver truck. "They all look the same," he muttered from the roof, looking out at dozens of identically nondescript warehouses. He didn't see how anyone could tell them apart. There was one way to find out for sure. The good thing about all these warehouses being identical was that they were pretty much the same on the inside too. Roman had rented one last week to assess its baseline security features and familiarize himself with its layout and weaknesses firsthand. Just like Neo couldn't get Little Miss Malachite's appearance right just from photo references, he didn't trust pictures and blueprints when their life or freedom was on the line. He consulted the map on his scroll and walked along the roof until he found the likeliest place to break in. X marks the spot. Roman aimed his cane down at the roof and fired a dust flare downward. Tools might have been better suited for breaking to the room below, with less mess and noise, but this was unquestionably the fastest way, and the ceilings weren't wired into the alarm system, especially in the bathroom. Roman waited for the smoke and dust to clear, and then he leaned down into the hole to look inside. He shone a flashlight from the back of his scroll into the room. Great. This was not the bathroom. It was the center of the warehouse storage area. He couldn't make out what was inside from the way up here, but the good news was he smelled coffee beans. How had he gotten the wrong spot? He checked his scroll and saw the map flipped upside down. When he turned the scroll over again to view it right side up, the map flipped again. He sighed. "May have a problem," he texted Neo. Slight miscalculation. Blew a hole into the main area. Stick to the plan, but start the clock. Though he couldn't hear an alarm, he might have triggered a silent alert. That meant they had 30 minutes at most before the police would arrive. Less if there was any security on site. He hadn't been able to confirm that part, but he thought it extremely unlikely. While crime organizations ran a brisk business stealing harvests from small coffee farmers in Mistral and selling them directly to distributors, here in Vale the risk was greater, and a lower chance of success. Why did I think this was a good idea again? Roman asked himself, but he didn't have time to second-guess the plan now. He attached the grappling hook from a lot of cudgel, and slowly lowered himself down into the room on a wire. The doors and the windows were all wired with infrared beams to detect motion, but once you were inside, like he was now... Excuse me. Okay. As he descended, he ran through the plan again for the umpteenth time. He wasn't here for all the coffee, just the good stuff. The imports from Mistral that only came in once a month because of the distance and expense in transporting shipments, not to mention the constant danger of grim attacks. They could take the entire pallet in a stolen truck Neo had waiting outside the loading dock. Now that he had broken in and entered, all he had to do was grab a forklift, locate the shipment, and then break an exit. Halt right there. A voice echoed throughout the large storage space. Roman peered down and saw Roche Saltz, the huntsman who had tried to stop him from robbing the first bank of Vale. Former huntsman. You! They both shouted at the same time. You're not supposed to be here, Roman said. Neither are you, Roche bellowed. Shouldn't you be out fighting Grim or something? They revoked my license because of you. Roche grabbed his weapon and aimed it at Roman. The claw on the one end of the staff hurtled toward Roman. Roman fired a flare from the tip of the cane, which both sent Roche diving out of the way and propelled Roman on the end of his spine, out of reach from the glassman claw. He used momentum to swing himself around and around the room, so Roche wouldn't be able to get a lock on him. It didn't take you for the kind of guy who would make a late-night coffee run, Roche said. I was hoping it would be a quiet evening, but this is more fun. Roman's brows knit together. It really was just one thing after another tonight, wasn't it? He was disappointed, but not angry. Sometimes even the best laid plans needed a little bit of improvisation. Roche spun his staff around, cocked the weapon behind him, and swung. A row of sharp spikes fanned out toward Roman. One of them smashed into his left leg. Roman grunted with pain and lost his grip on his cane, dropping 10 feet to the ground. Melodic Cudgel dropped down too and clattered a few feet away from him. He tried to retrieve it, but Rock's extended arm grabbed it first and yanked it out of reach. Roman Georgewick, you're under arrest, Roche said. Step 3. Getaway. Neo jumped her fingers at the steering wheel of the cargo truck. Roman was running behind schedule. She hadn't heard from him at all since their last text message, and she was worried he was in trouble. There was chatter on the police scanner about the warehouse. Their time was almost up. Muffled laughing came from the back of the vehicle. She had tied up and gagged the driver and stowed him back there when she took his truck. When she carjacked him, she hadn't been surprised at all. I knew something was going down, he said. You look different, but you're that same chick from the coffee place, right? I told the cops to keep an eye out for a robbery. Kidnapping a hostage hadn't been part of the plan, but he was just so annoying. She had an idea about framing him for the coffee heist, but she hadn't thought that far ahead yet. She might only mess with him a little more, and then cut him loose when he was good and scared. Neo wrote another text to Roman's scroll. It's time to go. But as soon as she hit send, She got a gunshot from inside the warehouse. New plan. Neo backed the truck out of the loading dock and revved the engine. No, no, no. The driver managed to check out around his gag. Yes, yes, yes. Neo floored the accelerator, and the truck lurched to life. It was slow to get moving, but once it hit a high velocity, the momentum made it unstoppable. The metal door of the loading dock crumpled like paper with a horrifying shrieking and tearing sound that made her jaw ache. She kept the truck speeding down the length of the warehouse. Up ahead, she saw Roman on the floor, bleeding. A burly man with shoulder-length white hair and silver armor loomed over him. He turned when he heard and saw the truck barreling toward him, but rather than jump out of the way, he turned to face it down. The truck hit him, and his aura flashed gray at the impact, but he was holding onto the front grille with a fierce expression on his face. He started to climb up it, his eyes locked on Neo. Then he and the truck smashed into a pillar at the center of the warehouse. His aura popped and he passed out. Good thing he cushioned the impact. The pillar began to crack, and pieces of the ceiling crumbled and fell. Neo's mouth opened. Oops. 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 In the back of the truck, the tussed-up driver whimpered. He had been bouncing around the trailer as it raced around, and it was even worse shape than before. In the rearview mirror, Neo saw a forklift carrying a plastic-bound pallet of coffee headed for the truck. It pulled up alongside the driver's window, and Roman leaned out. Need a lift? He said. Neo flashed him a thumbs up and opened the cargo door. As soon as she did, the driver jumped up and ran out of the truck. Roman casually threw his cane at him, hitting him in the head and knocking him out. Who's your friend? Roman asked. She swatted a hand at him in the mirror. Never mind. Right. Roman glanced at the pillar. When you move the truck, the thing's coming down, so I'd rather not linger. Plus, I hear the distinct sound of sirens approaching. I'll load this coffee, and then let's get out of here. Back at this, step 4. Profit. Question mark? Profit? Back at Roman's, they celebrated their victory with ice cream sundaes. Not only had they gotten the coffee they wanted, when the rest of the warehouse collapsed from the damage in the fight, it had ruined all the coffee they didn't take. It wouldn't be long before they were the only source of coffee in Vale, and they could set their price. Of all the successful heists Roman has done, this one felt the best. And maybe it was because he had come out richer than he had ever expected, with a partner who could keep up with him. Better than that, Neo complimented him, and she had watched his back. It was also nice to share this moment with someone who wasn't focused on splitting the profits. Neo was in it more for the mayhem than the money, just like him. Long ago, I never wanted a sidekick, Roman said. But then I met you. Roman spun and kicked him in the side. Caught by surprise, he flew across the room. Okay, I deserve that, he said. What I meant was a partner in crime. He looked up and Neo was standing over him, offering a hand to help him up. He took it. Chapter 18. Panopticon. Neapolitan was having second thoughts. As much as life at the school had improved, more and more felt like it wasn't giving her what she needed. She had already surpassed everything the teachers could give her, so she was just biding her time each day until she could start her real lessons with Roman. Couldn't she just quit and work with him? Unless she could come up with the information he needed to get little Miss Malachite off his back, he'd never agree to that. And if she left the school, she'd lose her only insider access and her best chance at helping him. Besides, she wouldn't have anywhere else to go. Meanwhile, it was clear that Lady Pete was becoming impatient with Neo. She wanted her to either bring Neo in herself or set him up so Melanie and Militia could finish the job. I need more time, Neo typed. She had used that phrase so often her scroll autofilled it for her. You have 3 days, or I'll expel you from the school and send you back to your parents. Neo scowled. but she nodded and decided to step things up. And tonight was the night she was going to break into the room. She texted Roman to cancel their usual plans. "Everything alright?" He wrote back. "Just need a night in to do the thing," she texted. "Right, the thing, gotcha." Then a little later he said, which thing?" Neo rolled her eyes. He would either figure it out or he would understand when she gave him an update, if there was anything to update. The room was where Lady Beat spent all of her time when she wasn't teaching or sleeping. Neo had stumbled across it when snooping through the school, opening every door, every drawer, every cabinet. Some doors were locked, and Neo had managed to pick those without too much trouble. Usually they were broom closets, storage rooms, or computer labs. But she had never been able to break into the room. She had staked it out to see who was using the room, and of course it was Lady Beat. She was there almost every night, for most of the night. But tonight she had gone out for the evening right after class, just for a meeting, so this was Neo's chance to finally get inside. Neo presented an illusion of an empty hallway when she knelt by the door and unrolled her lock-picking tools. She laughed when she saw the lock. It was the same one that Papa had put on her bedroom door. She hadn't been able to open it then, but she had been practicing on all unlocks of all types with Roman since. Even so, it was a tricky lock, and she was nervous. It took her 6 tries to open it, pausing and listening constantly for footsteps. She opened the door, slipped inside quickly, and shut it softly behind her. The room was lit by a soft glow of a computer screen and keyboard set up on a long console with lots of blinking lights and illuminated dials. Some kind of command station? Was this a security system for the school? But there weren't even any security cameras in the building. Neo sat down in a comfortable swivel chair in front of the computer and tapped on the keyboard. A lock screen popped up and a light above the monitor blinked on. A camera. Commencing face scan. 3, 2. Neo quickly shifted to look like Lady Beat. 1. Accepted. The screen flashed green, and a command prompt appeared. Then a hollow screen appeared on the far wall opposite the door and the computer. It was a security feed, after all, broken up into squares on a 12 by 12 grid. Most of the squares were black and grainy, except for one, which showed the computer screen she was looking at. Neo put her hand in front of the screen and waved it. Her hand moved in the video on the hollow. She brought her hand closer to her chest, and moved it around until she found the camera. The Triskelion pin. The same pin that every student at the school wore. So that was why there was no need for the security cameras. They were each wearing a body cam and sending the footage back to this viewing room. Neo pressed the arrow key on the keyboard and the hollow displays shifted. More scenes, but not from inside the school. And some of these were dark as well, but several showed footage from the streets of Vale. A couple showed dinner plates in restaurants, on a counter in a private kitchen. One showed a woman touching up her lipstick in a mirror. Neo spotted the Triskelion on her brooch pinned into her black coat and cocktail dress. What had Roman said? His online search had shown this pin being worn by societies all over the city, graduates of Lady Browning's Preparatory Academy for Girls. Many of them were leaders in government, executives, entrepreneurs, partners to important people, reporters, bankers. Lady Beat had an eye into some of the most sensitive secrets and private lives of people in Vale. Neo put in a hand to her mouth. This information was worth billions in Lien. It gave access to fortunes and secure servers. by showing people inputting their logins and passwords. It was a fly on the wall of important deals, and it was an endless source of blackmail material for people who didn't want their personal business made public or embarrassing secrets and criminal activity released to the authorities. Neo switched back to the feed of her own camera. Now that there was clear evidence that she had been in this room and knew what Lady Beat was up to, Neo gasped. That's how the headmistress had known she had a connection to Roman, and because she had been watching Neo's every move, she knew exactly what she could do and where to find Roman. Neo texted Roman, "They know where you live. Get to safety. Don't tell me where. I'll explain later." She had no sooner hit send than she caught movement on the holo display. Two of the cameras were walking around the school. It was well after lights out, and both cameras showed roughly the same view, but shifted slightly, like viewing two out-of-phase images that combine to make one 3D image. Two students, walking side by side when they shouldn't be out in their rooms. Melanie and Militia, and they looked like they were on their way here. Neo dashed back to the keyboard. She had to cover her tracks. She worked quickly. One eye on the holo display of the Malachite girls drew closer. They were climbing the stairs to this floor now. Neo pulled up the folder directory. It looked like files were recording in hour-long chunks organized by location, date, and another identifier. In the school folders, she found a folder marked Van 4815162342. She had tried to delete the files from the last few hours, copied in the files from the same time period from last night, and renamed them with today's date. She had hoped that the system wouldn't create a new file if there was already one there, so she should be covered for the rest of the night. From there, she would have to act normally until she could figure out a way to block the signal without arousing suspicion. She was about to delete the files when she thought better of it. If she deleted the footage, even if she replaced it with footage from another night, she would tip her hand. Instead, she needed to copy the whole archive and get out. She wouldn't get another chance. The Malachites were getting closer. The problem was Neo didn't have anything to copy the files with, and it would take too long to set up an online storage account, and that was traceable too. The archive was also huge. The Malachites' cameras showed that they had reached the hallway with the door to the room. Neo's computer skills clearly weren't up to the challenge, but her destructive talents were. She checked under and around the console until she found an access panel in the back. She pried it open with the blade from her parasol. Inside, she found the hard drive and yanked it out, snapping ribbon cables and wires. The screen behind her glitched, and it went dark. Neo shut down the display and locked the computer. Then she tucked away the storage and stepped out of the room. Melanie and Militate's Malachite were right outside. Malachite were right outside. They looked startled when she appeared. "You're back already?" Melanie said. It took Neo a moment to realize she still looked like Lady Beat. "Is Mother here? Did you get Torchwick?" Militia peeked around her to look inside the room. She sniffed. "Is something burning?" Neo shook her head. She started to push past them. She had to get out of there, or they'd wonder why Lady Beat wasn't talking. "We couldn't find Vanille. She must have snuck out too." Neo stopped. She turned to look at Melanie. She's turning into quite a competent asset," Melanie said. "I'm sure Mother would like to meet her, if only to have more leverage in Vale." Neo turned away. How'd they figure that? "Hold on. Where's your tattoo?" Melanie grabbed her by the back of her jacket and pulled down the collar. "Found you, Vanille." She yanked Neo down and backward and smashed a knee into her spine. Neo grunted from the blow, but her aura absorbed most of the impact. Melanie kneed again, but this time Neo managed to twist away and shrug her out of her jacket, dropping the Lady Beat illusion at the same time. Melanie let go of the jacket as if it was burning her. In this brief moment of distraction, Neo knocked her down with a roundhouse kick. She turned to run and found Militia blocking her exit. "Cute trick." Militia grabbed for Neo. Neo spun, so Militia grabbed her from behind. Then she slammed herself backward, knocking Militia into the wall. Neo jabbed her elbow into Militia's ribs and took off to the hallway. She reached the stairs with the twins right behind her. She hopped into the banister and waved at them as she slid down. Melanie hurled herself over the railing and smashed into Neo, sending the both of them tumbling down the stairs in a tangle of arms, legs, and blades. Neo's aura burst, and she lay dazed for a moment beside a similarly stunned Melanie. Militia skated down the banister of her heels, jumped and rolled through the air toward Neo, the knives in her heels extended. Neo drew her parasol and opened the canopy. Militia bounced off the reinforced fabric and landed in a crouch beside and facing Neo. "You should be on our side," Milishade said. Why stick with a loser like Torchwick?" Neo flashed her a rude hand gesture. You could just live with the middle finger. "In fact, I bet he's already lost. Mother's been planning her revenge for a while. I wonder which technique she's gonna go with." Melanie lifted her head. She stared at Neo's bag. "She has a surveillance drive." Melanie lunged for it, but Neo hopped away. The girl braced on her right leg and started kicking with her left. Neo extended Hush's blade and parried her blows, edging backwards toward a window. She was still a couple stories up, but it wouldn't be the first time she'd leaped from one. Milishades joined the assault, and Neo kept blocking and thrusting their blades. Finally, she'd had enough. Neo held her parasol in front of her and rushed between the girls, who tried to dodge out of the way. She hooked Milishade's wrist with her parasol and pulled her downward with the bladed tip of Hush, redirected a kick from Melanie. At the same time, she launched herself, so she was flipping over them and landing facing the opposite direction. Without the slightest hesitation, she ran for the window. She opened Hush just as she reached the glass, which exploded outward. She jumped out, and her momentum carried her away from the building in a wide descending arc. She held her parasol aloft, and it caught a breeze. She drifted toward the ground. She saw the girls watch her for a moment before they turned and disappeared from the window. She didn't think they were going to go back to their rooms. Together, Neo and Roman could figure out what to do with the data she had just stolen and the information about the secret spy network, but she had to find him. And from what the Melanie and Militia said, others were out there looking for him now. She landed and folded up Hush. The drive was still in her bag, was still in the bag at her side. She pulled out her scroll to ask Roman where he'd wanted to meet, but he hadn't responded yet. He'd always answered her right away. But according to her scroll, the message hadn't been delivered. His own scroll must be off, broken, or someone without a signal, whether it was out of range or being blocked. If little Miss Malachite and Lady B had found Roman, it was all her fault. She may not have known of her every move and was being recorded, exposing him, but she agreed to let him to win his trust under misleading circumstances, and she hadn't even held up her end of the bargain with him in return. If she had done more to investigate the Academy, Lady B, and the Malachites, she might have discovered Little Miss's operation sooner and helped to put an end to it. Perhaps the most unsettling thing about the situation was how much she cared about what happened to Roman. Somewhere along the way, despite her duplicity, he'd become a real friend. She started running. "I'm coming, Roman." She wasn't going to let this friend disappear. Okay, I just need a little bit of water. Okay. Chapter 19. Torch Song. Roman studied his crime board. The ideas were looking a little light. There weren't many opportunities left for him, with Heishong having so much control over the legal activities in the city. Roman just didn't have the crew or the music to horn in on his territory, which just left jobs that he and Neo could handle on their own. He rather preferred it that way. They didn't have to follow anyone else's orders. They didn't have to give any orders. In his experience, that was the real weakness in any organization. Good help was hard to find, and when you had to hire criminals to do your dirty work, they were often in it for themselves. They made much less money that way, but it certainly seemed more fun. They were shaking things up in Vale, and it was amusing to watch the authorities and the news try to figure out why someone would steal an art print from the museum gift shop instead of the priced original, or rob a convenience store for a six-pack of Dr. Piper. As an added bonus, they were putting the heat on Zhang. The cops assumed he controlled all the crime in the city, so Zhang was in the strange predicament of not wanting to take credit for those bizarre crimes, nor admit that someone else was operating on his turf. That had to make him angry. Someone pounded on the apartment door. Speaking of angry, Roman crossed another item off his scribe board and went to the door. He tried to call up the video on the intercom, but it seemed to be on the fritz, so he peeked through the peephole instead. It was little Miss Malachite. Ah, Roman said. He thought Neo had canceled their training tonight, but she probably sent that text message just to set up this prank. That's almost perfect, but you can't fool me twice. I told you, if little Miss really... The door bulged with the bullet holes and shots filled the air. Roman dove out of the way toward the couch as the door gave way and tore apart from the gunfire. A hand reached inside and unlocked it. The door creaked open before falling off its frame. Roman grabbed his cane from the coffee table and peered around the side of the couch as little Miss Malachite stepped inside. Hello, Roman. Were you expecting someone else? She fanned herself. She won't be coming. Roman fired his flare gun at her. She casually batted the projectile away with her fan. It hit the television and exploded, blowing a hole in his bedroom. Is that how you greet an old friend? She asked mildly. It is after you come shooting up my door. The condo board's going to be really upset. She looked around. They should be more upset with how you've decorated. The stolen painting by Madame Mauve clashes with the stolen antique vase over there. Honestly, Roman, what did they teach kids today? A woman stepped into the apartment. Lady Beatrix Browning from Neo's school. What did you do to Neo? He shouted. Browning tilted her head. Young Miss Vanille led us to you. And here we are, little Miss smiled. Reunited at last. I don't believe that. You wouldn't betray him like that. Oh. Browning held up her scroll and played a video. He couldn't see Neo's face because the video was from her point of view, but he saw her hands typing on her scroll when she conversed with Browning in front of her. Trivia Vanille, will you help me capture Roman Torchwick? You can count on me, said a mechanical voice. I know I can. Neo had used him? She'd lied to him. Neapolitan wasn't even her real name. It was Trivia Vanille, which sounded strangely familiar to him for some reason. Roman scowled. What had he expected? He had been using her too, or at least he started out that way. But he had changed his mind, and his feelings about her. He had trusted her, with his life, apparently. What do you want? He demanded. I want everything, Little Miss said, starting with what you owe me. I spent all your money, and even if I hadn't, I wouldn't give it back. And she sat down at a high stool at the kitchen counter. She looked around disdainfully. I'm not talking about money, dear. You know what I value most? Information and loyalty. I'm surprised you came all this way just for me. Roman walked casually around the couch. If he knew Little Miss, his building was already crawling with spiders. If he somehow got past her, he would have to fight his way out through the rest of them. There was a chance he wouldn't make it, but he was a fighter, and he'd bet on himself any day. As usual, it was his supposed friends who had turned on him. He wouldn't make that mistake again. You have an inflated ego. I had other business here. Like you always used to say, if you want a job done right, you have to do it yourself. See, I have learned something from you, just as you've learned from me. She put her hand to her face thoughtfully. We really did have some good times together. he sure did. Hey, since it seems my old partner had betrayed me, maybe I'd be interested in putting the old team back together. What do you say? Little Miss leaned forward. There was a time that I might have welcomed an offer like that, but I think it's clear that you aren't a good team player, and you don't like sharing. She sat up. Neither do I. However, I'm not going to kill you now. Roman hid his relief. You're not? No, I can't kill you in a tacky place like this. Tacky? Roman said. You're coming back to Mistral with me. I have a whole room ready for you back home. You're coming back to me. Roman assumed his battle stance. I'm not going anywhere with you. There's a time and a place for violence, but sometimes there's an easier way. Little Miss snapped her fan closed, and a woman entered the room, flanked by a couple of spider henchmen. Honey, Roman said, what are you doing here? Hey, Torch, Honeywine said. It was nice to catch up with you a few months ago. She tipped her hat to Little Miss. I forgot to mention, she gave me a loan to open the Harmony Club. And it's coming due, Roman said. Little Miss, Lady Beat, and the spider henchmen stuffed earplugs into their ears. Honey opened her mouth and started singing. Roman covered his ears with his hands and ran for the door, but he could still hear her, and the room started to spin. He made it to the door anyway, but when the spiders punched him in the chest and he doubled over, the other goon grabbed his arms and held them behind his back, so he had to listen to Honey's song. The first one took his cane and the scroll from his pocket and broke it in half. But all things considered, he felt pretty good what was going on. Giddy, even. It felt like he was watching it happen to someone else. He forgot about why he had been trying to run. He just wanted to keep listening to the music. He had followed down the hall and into the elevator, swaying on his feet, almost in stupor. The next thing he knew, he was being tied up and tossed in the back of a van, with 4 spiders guarding him. Honey raised her voice to a crescendo, and when she stopped singing, he blacked out. Okay, get enough water. I got a text message. Okay. I'm a little hungry. But I promise I keep reading. What do we start on? We're 6 chapters in right now. Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 20. Boss for a day. Neil was too late. Roman was gone. The front door of his apartment had been blown apart. The rest of the place didn't look much better. There was still a smoking hole in his TV, and the wall had been melted on, and his couch was in tatters. She had found the broken halves of Roman's scroll on the floor by the door, so that's why he hadn't responded to her messages since she escaped her school. She sat on a kitchen stool and placed the data drive in front of her. It wasn't that big, the same shape and size of a brick. But it couldn't have been worth more if it were made of solid gold. Perhaps she could trade it for Roman. Little Miss Malachite would likely be upset when she found out it was gone. Not just the information it contained, but it exposed her entire scheme and veil. What would Roman do if it were Neo who had been captured? forget about her and sell the drive to the highest bidder, and she wouldn't blame him for it. You didn't survive and get as far as he had by being sentimental. Mia hopped off the stool. She had wished she could make a backup of the drive, but she didn't have the time or the equipment. She would only get one shot, and she had to make this count. She hadn't meant it to happen, but Roman had been caught because of her, and she wasn't going to hide from her responsibilities anymore. He was practically the only thing that mattered to her in the whole world right now, and she wasn't going to lose him. She left the apartment building and saw the cop car she had passed on the way in was still there. Someone must have complained about the noise in the penthouse, but they didn't seem to be in any hurry to investigate. If they'd known it was Roman Torchwick's apartment and that little Miss Malachite was in town, that might have lit a fire under them. Nia was halfway down the block when she'd stopped and turned around. She walked over to the cop car. By the time she was next to the driver's side, both sides of her hair and both eyes were brown, and she was wearing an unmodified school uniform, including the jacket she had left behind. The cop rolled the window down. "Good evening. Can I help you?" Neo held up her scroll and displayed a message. I need to report a crime." The cop sat straighter. "A crime?" His partner leaned over. "What are we supposed to do about it?" Neo squinted her right eye. She stepped back and pointed at the Vale Police Department shield on the door. She raised her eyebrows. The second cop laughed. "I'm just messing with you." What kind of crime? Are you hurt?" the driver asked. "Sort of, but that's not the point." She shook her head. She typed again. "Roman Torchwick was just kidnapped." "What's that say?" His partner asked. "I can't read that. What's she doing with the school?" "She can't talk," the driver whispered. "She says Torchwick was kidnapped." "Torchwick?" The partner looked at Neo. "What do you know about that crook?" "Oops. Maybe that wasn't the right approach." "Never mind. I have evidence that a crime boss has been spying onto citizens of Vale at the highest levels." She hoped 3 exclamation points would convey the seriousness of the situation and put her hands into her head for good measure. The partner looked around. "Is there a hidden camera? Are we being put on for a show?" Neo rolled her eyes. "Yes, to literally hundreds of hidden cameras everywhere. That was the point." But it was too much to type. She really missed Roman. Most of the time she didn't need to say anything, and he knew exactly what she was thinking. The exasperation must have shown in her face. The driver narrowed his eyes. "What did you say your name was?" She started typing Neo, then deleted it and wrote Trivia Vanille. "Right. 1 second, Miss Vanille." He rolled the window up and consulted with his partner. While he ran her name, if not for her father, she would have had a rap sheet for all her crimes and misdemeanors before, all of which paled in comparison to the crimes she and Roman had done. He stepped out of the car and opened the back door. "Okay, come with us," he said. Neo felt relieved. She doubted she could get the cops interested in saving Roman Torchwick, but they'd definitely be interested in capturing him and bringing in little Miss Malachite and Lady Beat. But they didn't bring her to the police station like she'd expected. Instead, they rolled up to a nightclub downtown called Junior's. Neo raised an eyebrow. Why would the police bring her here? She tightened her grip on Hush. She wasn't really worried, especially since they thought she was Jimmy Vanille's meek daughter. She'd let this play out for a little longer. She marched her through the club. She hated the loud music pounding all around her. This looked like the kind of place Melanie and Militiades would hang out, and she really didn't get the appeal. She made note of that there were a few exits, each of them guarded by a man in a suit with red aviators and a red tie. Similarly dressed goons, obvious members of some crime organization, were situated throughout the establishment. In fact, there were more of them than there were customers, so it didn't seem like the business was doing particularly well. The music stopped and the cops were spotted. The tall man with a scraggly beard walked up. Neo thought he was just another bouncer until he greeted the cops by name. "Officers Dunn and Looney, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "We're here to see your father." "In the back." Her eyes moved down Neo's body. She gritted her teeth and concentrated on not kicking him in the face. "She's 18, Officer Looney said. "Right." The man wandered off. They shepherded Neo through a back hallway and then through another large room, a casino. No one looked up as they passed through the door, which led to another short corridor with a steel door at the end of it. If this were a video game, that would be the door leading to the final boss. So Neo was a little disappointed when... Sorry, hold on. Behind a modest desk sat a broad-shouldered man with long graying black hair and a bushy beard, wearing a loose pinstripe suit. He was missing most of his left ear. On his left was a willowy woman. There was a willowy woman with a smart brown blazer and a matching skirt. Neo noticed a familiar Triskelion pin on her lapel, marking her as a Browning Academy graduate. The woman took more interest in Neo when she noticed the identical pin on Neo's lapel, both of them illusory replacements for the real thing, just for show. "Good work, boys," the man said in a gruff voice. "See Junior for your weekly bribe." "Do you need to call it that, boss?" "I call it what it is. You can call it whatever you want. The money will spend the same. Now leave us." Officer Dunn patted Neo on the shoulder. "I don't know what you did, but good luck." Then he left with his partner. Neo didn't know what she had done either. She had done a lot of things, but she didn't know which one it was that got the attention of whoever this guy was. "Please, have a seat. Would you like something to eat or drink?" Neo shook her head and sat down. "You don't remember me, but I'm a friend of your father's." He pointed to a photo of his wall of him and Papa standing together outside one of Papa's warehouses on the waterfront. Judging from the amount of hair still on Papa's head, it had been taken a few years ago. "I'm Hei Xiong. You can call me Uncle Hay. I didn't see you around the house too often, but I used to bring you presents. Fairy tales mostly, so something told me you liked to read." Now she had remembered him. He had been in that party the last time she had been picked up by the cops in the city. She had remembered those books too. She had wondered where they'd come from, because her parents certainly never would have thought to buy them for her. She particularly liked the story about the girl trapped in the tower by her evil father. She could relate, though not so much with a powerful magician coming to her rescue. If only real life were more like the stories she liked to read. She nodded and typed on her scroll. "Thank you. I love those books." "Good, I'm glad," he smiled. "I've been looking for you for a while. That's why I had the boys keep an eye out for you, in case you turned up." He shook his head. "Your parents did a good job of hiding you." "Hiding?" Neo raised an eyebrow. "But now that I've found you, I have the leverage I need to renegotiate my deal with Jimmy. He's been cutting me out more and more, and I can't say I like it." Neo's jaw dropped. "I don't like to involve an innocent girl in my business dealings, but I promise you'll be treated well." He looked at the blonde woman behind him. "My associate Stella will take care of you. Anything you need." Neo stood and shook her head. "No? What do you mean, no? I wasn't asking." Hello, welcome. How you doing tonight?" "That isn't why I'm here," she typed. "I have information." Xiang leaned back in his seat and chuckled. "She has information? Okay, what do you got?" Neo looked at Stella nervously. Which was he more likely to be interested in? The data drive and the surveillance plot? Or little Miss Malachite kidnapping Roman Torchwick. Neo blew the bangs out of her eyes. She might as well go all in, as Roman would say. She held up a finger, telling him to wait a moment. This was going to take a moment. Then she typed. Little Miss Malachite has been spying on everyone in Vale using cameras hidden in alumni pins from Lady Browning's Preparatory Academy for Girls. She used that surveillance network to locate Roman Torchwick, and she kidnapped him tonight. Zhang looked shocked. He glanced at Stella, who had taken off their pin and was staring at it. Zhang took it from her, took out a pistol, and smashed the butt of the gun down on the pin. There was a tiny puff of smoke, and Neo smelt burned dust. He poked through the components with a pen and picked up a tiny broken lens. I'm sorry, sir. I had no idea, Stella said. Zhang clenched a fist. What's done is done. Why should I care now if Malachite is leaving and taking Torchwick with her? Neo needed him to believe her. She typed, Torchwick has the data drive with all the business you've been conducting for the last 6 months on it. Malachite is going to use it to take you down and take over your operation in Vale. Zhang's face turned red. He was silent, and then he nodded. Sounds like something she'd do. He pointed at Stella without looking at her. Get the bullhead ready. We're taking the team to go after her. Stella hurried out of the room. Thank you, Neo typed. I don't know what your whole deal with Torchwick is, but you've fallen in with the wrong crowd. Obviously. I'm gonna set it right. You belong home with Jimmy and Carmel, and I'll take you back there as soon as Jimmy agrees to my demands. You're going to ransom me? Neo typed. Ransom is such an ugly word. I call it what it is, she responded. He laughed and wagged a finger. You're clever, all right. Jimmy always said you were a handful. I see where he's coming from. I wish I had a daughter like you instead of my idiot son. Neo changed into his son, Junior, and winked. What the? Zhang practically fell out of his chair as he scrambled backward. Neo stood and changed back to herself and unsheathed the blade in her parasol. Zhang drew a gun, but she knocked it out of his hand easily and cornered him, the sharp tip pressing against the artery in his neck. She put a finger to her lips. Don't make a sound. She pulled out a pair of wrist constraints she had lifted from Officer Looney on his way here of the office and bound Heizhong with them. You aren't going to get away with this, he said. She stuffed his tie into his mouth to keep him quiet before she changed into him, so his panicked screams were muffled. She stowed him on the couch and used her semblance to disguise herself as him. Then she opened the door wide and found Stella waiting. We're ready to move out, sir, she said. Neo nodded. She made sure Stella and the 2 bouncers she had brought with her could see Neo sleeping on the couch. She once again gestured for them to be quiet, then pointed at the 2 guards and then at the door. They nodded and locked it behind her, and took up positions on either side. Neo followed Stella through another path of twisty corridors, into an elevator, which they rode to the roof. There, a small gray and black airship waited for them. Neo headed for the co-pilot seat. Sir, you usually sit in the back. Neo fixed an intense glare on Stella and held it steady until the woman blinked. Of course. Buckle in. Neo carefully watched Stella's pre-flight sequence and everything she did to get the bullhead up in the air. She followed along on the user manual she had pulled up on her scroll and compared to the console to the diagram. Where to? Stella asked. Neo pulled out the scroll and opened her tracking software. Neo pulled out her scroll and opened her tracking software. It took a moment to acquire a signal from the CCTS, but soon it fixed on the pulsing blue dot, ready to set and moving steadily to the east. There you are, Neo thought. Good thing Roman never left home without his hat. She stuck the scroll to the dashboard. Stella gave her a skeptical look, but she adjusted the course to follow the map. 30 minutes later, she pointed down through the windshield. We have a visual on little Miss Malachite, Stella said. Neo leaned forward and looked down. About half a kilometer below was a purple sedan. A purple sedan was driving away. Was driving ahead of a convoy, which was where Roman most likely was. Sir, do we engage? Once we get close enough to attack them, they'll be able to hear us. They'll know we're coming. Neo turned and looked behind her. There were a dozen of Junior's bouncers back there, wearing helmets with red visors and combat vests armed with machine guns. Neo waved at them, and they looked at each other confused for a moment before waving back. And then she reached for the button that would open the cargo door. Not that one. Stella covered the button with her hand. What do you think you're doing, sir? Neo smashed her fist against Stella's hand, pushing the button. The door opened and the men in the back were blown out of the bullhead. Oh my god! Stella twisted around and saw the empty cargo hold. Thank the brothers they had parachutes. Why did you do that? She shouted. Neo dropped the Heishong's illusion. Stella gasped, but she was so surprised Neo was able to reach over to unbuckle her seatbelt. She pulled the woman out of her seat and tossed her into the back. Stella managed to catch herself before she stumbled out the cargo doors. She pulled her gun and started firing at Neo. The windshield took 2 bullets and started a spiderweb. Neo faced forward and pulled back on the stick, bringing the bullhead upward sharply. Neo faced forward and pulled back on the stick. Oh, wait. She heard a shriek, and when she glanced back, Stella wasn't there anymore. Did she have a parachute? Neo wondered. She shrugged and set a course for Malachite's convoy. Okay, I think that actually is where I'm going to end it for tonight. I know I've had longer ASMR streams, but I want to do one more. I want to do one more ASMR, like one more stream for Roman Holiday. And if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need to have quite a bit of substance left. So we're on chapter 21, and there are 26 chapters in RWBY Roman Holiday. So we're going to finish this next time. Okay? So I hope I was able to help some people relax. And yeah. Obviously, you know, I don't rate out when I stream ASMR. So, I hope that you guys have a great rest of your night. And I will see you all next time. Ciao for now.